Welcome to Controlled Chaos. I'm Shana. And can you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, hello. My name is Shelby Christensen. I am a wife. I'm a mom of two young kids. I am also a teacher. I teach fifth grade, and I am hoping to inspire people over on my Instagram at Alcohol Free Mama to just spread awareness and joy behind living a sober life.
I love that. How did your journey with recovery or sobriety start?
I guess I started drinking alcohol in my teenage years, and it, like, in hindsight, looking back, it was problematic back then too. But everybody around me was doing the same thing. So it's not like I stood out as like, oh, she's got a problem. Everybody around me was getting, having way too much and getting wasted all the time. So it just never like brought up any red flags for me, I guess.
Right.
I worked in the restaurant industry for a long time, and there's a huge drinking culture there. So, yeah, that was like the people that I was surrounded by all the time, and drinking way too much, drinking and driving, just putting myself in lots of really unsafe situations that now in my 30s and as a mother, I look back and I'm just like, oh my God, like, thank God nothing worse happened. Thank God I survived it. Thank God I didn't hurt anybody else. But really, I think my drinking took kind of a shift for me into more dangerous territory when I became a mother. Lots of my childhood traumas that I thought I had moved on from kind of all came like bubbling to the surface when I was kind of seeing life through that new lens as a mom. And I noticed in myself that I was trying to mute like hard feelings.
Right.
So I definitely, and then I guess I would say another big shift too was when COVID happened and everything shut down. I went from, I think, what I would still consider like really problematic drinking, binge drinking on the weekends and stuff, to then it was like, okay, less responsibility, everything's online. And so it was easy for me to say, oh, well, it's okay. Like everybody's home, we're home, let's have some tonight too. And it just
Right.
kind of bled over into where it was like, I would go weeks where I would have not taken a break. And that just wasn't like me. I became very anxious, very depressed. And it got to the point where like I couldn't even look myself in the mirror. I was so out of alignment with, what I knew was right and what I knew I should be doing better. But then at the end of the day, even after telling myself all day long, I'm not going to drink tonight, I would still go and have those drinks with my husband. So that was when a really big shift happened for me. And that was when I kind of became very curious about my behavior and like started reading and learning because I was like, this isn't going anywhere good.
So you bring up a few points that I want to touch on and that I've had similar experiences with. The first thing, and it's something that a lot of people don't really talk about because of maybe the stigma or having people look at them differently, but it's the driving and drinking, right? And especially with your kids
Mm-hmm.
involved. I live in kind of a small town, and I was drinking 24/7. So I would always tell myself, like, I'm not really drunk. Like, my kids got to get to dance, or they have to get here, or they have to get there. So I'm going to bring them. Right. And I think about it now and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, winter is like ridiculous here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not just that, like the safety of like my kids or other people. Right. Or even myself. Like, it wasn't something that I thought of really, I guess, or I guess that I thought I wasn't really drunk, right? I was just,
Mm-hmm.
had enough to not have the shakes or not be sick or whatever. But looking back, I'm like, I'm so blessed that I didn't hurt someone, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that that's huge that it's something that you would, you know, talk about out loud, because I think as moms, it can be very almost like embarrassing, right? To admit the
Mhm.
things that we've done during our addiction or things like that.
Yeah, for sure. I will say like I never drank when I was driving with my kids. Thank goodness for that. But I can see that it could have gotten to that point.
Mhm.
My um my like embarrassment and shame comes from like when I was younger, and I can look back and I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many times I drank and drove. Like we would literally go to the bar, get totally hammered, and then all drive home from there. And I can even remember one night in particular that I was like at somebody's house and I didn't want to be there anymore. And I left and I literally ping ponged my car down the street, slammed into several different cars. And then like my friends just helped me find a place to pull my car off to the side. And then somebody drove me home. But
Mhm.
like, and I still feel so terrible about that. Like I could have killed somebody and I could have hurt myself really badly. Like I should have gotten a DUI. I thank goodness like I didn't find myself in any kind of trouble, but I certainly should have. There was many times. And again, I think just like I was lucky to have some people around me that like, yeah, they got me home safe, but also everybody just kind of laughed it off like, oh, Shelby, ha ha ha, you did this crazy thing. That's just like, why didn't somebody shake me and say like, this is not normal. Like you cannot be behaving this way. You could have hurt somebody. Nobody said that to me. It was just everybody was doing kind of the same types
And
of
I
things
think
I
it,
was doing.
yeah, I think it brings it back to the point where even people who aren't per se problematic drinkers or alcoholics in our society today, there really is kind of an over drinking problem, right? Or people doing things like driving home and not really caring about it at the time because they're just drunk or whatever, right? It is highly accepted in our culture, even though it isn't the greatest thing for most of us, right?
Right. Yeah, I kind of also think that it's just not good for anybody, period. Like it's a poison, it's a toxin, it's going to have negative effects on everybody. There's obviously like a spectrum of people who become really addicted and I understand that, but I also think that there's this false belief due to like our culture and media that kind of shines this happy light on alcohol as if it has to be present at every occasion, and it's such a part of our culture that we've just accepted it as normal behavior when I don't think I feel like there's lots of normal drinkers I don't think that that's really normal. I think that we've just become to accept it as normal.
Yeah, I would kind of
Does
agree with
that make
that.
sense?
I remember growing up, my mom and dad were so keen on like, smoking is bad. Smoking gives you cancer and smoking this and smoking that. And I actually just a few months ago, and I worked in treatment for like 14, 15 years. I just recently learned that alcohol is a poison and like what it actually has in it. And I'm like, that's so crazy that it's not something that's even really talked about, right?
Yeah, the alcohol industry is, a multi-billion dollar industry. They spend a lot of money convincing us that it's okay, that it's safe, that it's not that bad. And I, for the longest time, and many people still are just very tricked by that because it's hard when you're constantly seeing it in this positive light and it's part of every occasion, and oh, it's not that bad, it's in a pretty bottle, how could it be a poison? But it is, and I think that's why they're making so much money, because they can just disguise it as something that's not so bad, and then we consume it and become addicted to it. And yeah, there's definitely lots of false information out there, and that was one big part of my recovery, was just learning the facts, like what it
Right.
actually is, and kind of rewiring my brain, because I had been conditioned to believe it was this one thing, one way, this is what it is, but that wasn't the truth.
Agreed. So another thing that you kind of touched on was anxiety and depression. And I know for me, and I really believe I tricked myself into thinking that alcohol fixed that, right? Like I would always have panic attacks and always be super anxious and like scared to talk to people. And my confidence was super low. And I felt like alcohol fixed that, right? I could go anywhere, I could say anything. And if I was anxious and shaky or whatever, I would drink and I felt like it fixed that. But somewhere along the lines, it was making it worse, obviously, because it's a depressant. But for me, I was really tricked into thinking it was making things better. What did it look like for you as far as like anxiety and depression?
So I generally was never an anxious or depressed person, and it that just, it just wasn't, I guess I did, have a little bit of like anxious thoughts and things. Like I've always had a tendency to worry since I was young because of things I went through in my childhood, that I was worried about bad things happening and whatever. So that was always a little bit there. But when I had my own kids and stuff, that voice really, really ramped up, and my anxiety showed up like internally so much more. It was such a mental struggle that I dealt with, where it was just this constant loop in my head that was feeding me like, you're terrible, you're a horrible person, like these bad things are going to happen because of your decisions, and you're a crappy mom, and you're a piece of shit because you can't figure out how to quit drinking. And it was just this endless, relentless loop of negative thoughts that I could not escape. And I
Right.
would start to take breaks from alcohol. Like I would do like a week or 2 weeks or a 30-day like challenge or whatever. And over time, I started to really notice that as soon as alcohol was removed for any significant amount of time, those voices really ceased. And I'm
Oh,
like, so even though I think I'm drinking at night to quiet the voices because my brain was so busy, I just wanted peace, it ultimately ramped it up the next day. So it really wasn't helping in the way that I thought it was.
definitely. I think once, and it did actually take my anxiety and depression a while to calm down. And that doesn't mean that it's gone at all, because it is something that I've always had throughout my life. But it did take me a while after getting sober to, like, for a lot of that to calm down. And I think for some people, they stop drinking, say they do like the dry January or things like that, and they're like, oh my God, I if this is how I'm gonna feel for my whole life, it's a no for me, right? So I
Yeah.
always try to tell people that do like deal with anxiety and depression on a normal, that it can take a little bit of time, right? For somebody who doesn't have a lot of that, it might go away quickly, but how you feel on your first month sober is not necessarily how you'll feel at a year sober.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've noticed too that the longer that I've been sober, I have realized that like, okay, the intrusive thoughts still come. The worry is still there. The sad days are still there, but I'm just so much better equipped to handle them without alcohol in the picture. And I can move through it more easily instead of getting stuck and just spinning out on something. I can just feel it and move through it. And there's lots of things at play too. Like I've been in therapy and I've been doing all kinds of work on myself. So it isn't just a simple like remove alcohol and everything's shiny. I never want to make it feel like it's that way, because it certainly isn't. I mean, all of your problems are still there. But for me, what I've found is that when you remove alcohol, you can get to those things then. Like there's things that I went to therapy about after getting sober that I hadn't talked about ever. Like I just buried it, and I never talked about it and never got it out. It was still very much like trapped in my body.
Mhm.
And so removing alcohol gave me the clarity to just see like, okay, this is something I still need help with. Let me get some therapy. Let me work through these things so that I can move forward. And if I
Mhm.
was still drinking, I wouldn't have. I kind of avoided therapy for a while because I knew that drinking was the problem. Like deep down, I knew that that was the problem. And I didn't
Right.
want anyone asking me about it. I went to therapy a couple times, and someone was like, a doctor one time told me, well, why don't you remove alcohol? And I was doing this cleanse. And I remember her being, I said, oh, I followed it except for Saturday. And she's like, so if we can't go a week without having anything, either you're not committed to the cleanse that we're doing, or we have a bigger problem that we need to address. Well, I never went back to that doctor because I'm like, oh, she saw me. Like, she knows my problem. And same
Right.
with a therapist too, one time, who was, when I was telling, I think I'm drinking too much. I think it's a problem. Well, why don't you remove it? He said. And I'm like, well, I just wasn't ready to do that. And so it was hard to hear that. So now finally it's like, okay, now when I'm getting therapy, we can actually get to the heart of like what my problems and what my issues were, so that I can work through them instead of just trying to mask them with alcohol.
Right. So you bring up something good, and that's like about our toolbox, right? I feel like sometimes people think that there's just a one size fits all solution to drinking or using to stopping, right? And
Mm-hmm.
for was definitely, I had tried for years and years to get sober. And I really thought like I was just that person that couldn't do it. Right. I finally found the tools that I could put together, a bunch of different things that worked for me. So, what are some things that are in your toolbox? I know you mentioned therapy. What else do you feel has been helpful in your sobriety?
So for me, I think ultimately learning and knowledge has been really powerful for me. Because I'm a teacher, I just have that like lifelong learner mentality. And it
Mhm.
was really before I even quit drinking that I started learning in my profession. We learned about like this study that was done called the ACEs study. Are you familiar with that?
Mhm.
And yeah, and so when, I'm learning about it in the context of how can I be a better teacher, right? Like my kids are coming in with these traumas. How can I help them beat the odds and be successful even despite the things they're going through? But for
Right.
me, I was like making that personal connection because I'm like, wait, my dad was incarcerated and he had a drug addiction and my mom drinks too much. And I'm like kind of checking these boxes on my own, on myself as I'm learning about how to help my students. And so that kind of piqued my curiosity. And I think that learning, and also I'm an adoptee, and I started to kind of dig into that more, and statistically like what happens to adoptees and their likelihood for becoming addicts and or having substance abuse issues is really high. And so when I looked at it from that point of view, and I'm like, okay, I kind of think this is troublesome for me. If I don't do something about it, statistically, like this is where I'm going to end up. Like this is what the numbers say. And so for me, a big tool was learning, reading. I read a book that was really powerful for me was Annie Grace's This Naked Mind, because that really broke down for me like what alcohol actually is and how my brain has been tricked into believing that it's something that I need. Reading, basically. Reading and listening to podcasts. I kind of just drenched myself in knowledge. Like anytime I was in the car, anytime I was trying to quit, and I would like just go to bed super early to avoid any obstacles that might come my way
Right.
or temptation. And I would just grab a book and read about someone else's story or how somebody else overcame it or knowledge about the truth of alcohol. That's been probably my most powerful tool.
So, being a mom and a teacher, is it something, I don't remember how old you said your children were, but is it something you've talked to your kids about or that you plan on speaking to them about? Like, how will you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something I have, again, been trying to learn a lot about because
Uh,
as moms, like we just don't want to mess up, right? Like we're doing everything we can to just not screw up our kids. And I mean, for me, I had lots of childhood traumas, and so it's very present in my mind of like my actions and how they will affect my kids. What I did at first was like tried to avoid it, like, thinking my daughter's 8 years old, and so I say, oh, she's too young, she's too young. Well, the truth of the matter is she's exposed to the message. She's already being exposed to the messages of alcohol, whether it's watching a Disney movie because there's people drinking in Disney movies, or going to the grocery store and seeing advertisements. She's already exposed to it, and for my daughter it's going to be part of her story. In addition to me quitting drinking, my mom quit drinking. She previously had a problem with alcohol, and also my mother-in-law moved in with us this past summer because she ran into trouble with alcohol and lost her job and had to go to treatment. So I initially did not tell my daughter the truth. I told her grandma's just moving in because she's looking for a new place. But I've been reading a book by Jessica Leahy called The Addiction Inoculation, and she gives lots of really good information in that book about why it's important to just speak the truth to our kids from a young age. I can't shelter her from it. It's going to be part of her story. And I think that if I leave pieces out and don't tell her the truth, then she's going to fill in those blanks on her own.
right.
And I don't want her filling in those blanks with something that, what if she were to like blame herself for something? Like, I don't want that. So, in a very, kind of I didn't tell her all the details, obviously, but I did tell her that like grandma had a problem with alcohol. Mommy used to drink alcohol. It's not good for us. You know, that's why I chose not to. I kind of told it to her in that way, just to open the conversation. We haven't really talked about it since, but I felt so good after having that talk with her because she kind of asked me questions as the day went on. So I knew she was thinking about it. And if I don't give her the message that alcohol is harmful and that it's not good for us and that it ruins lives and things like that, then she's going to pick up the message from somewhere else. So I would rather be informing what she's, hearing. That's kind of how I'm approaching it. And also as a teacher, they are aware. Like we think, oh, kids are so young, they don't know. Believe me, kids tell you everything, right? And when you're a teacher. So when I'm asking kids what their favorite drink is, and I have fifth graders jokingly writing down vodka, they're seeing it, you know, they're seeing it
Yeah,
there. And I have,
I is that they really do know, hear, and see a lot more than we think. I have an 8-year-old, but I also have daughters that are older and were present for a lot of my addiction, alcoholism. So I really wasn't able to even really think about hiding it. I guess I had to always be kind of open and upfront about it. My youngest daughter, though, she was pretty young, and I think that she won't remember a lot of things that happen, but I still want her to know what happened and know who I am, and just that these things do happen and it can be harmful, right? Like
Mhm.
it is like a drink for fun and everything is good because it's not for everyone, right?
Right. Yeah, it destroys families, it destroys people. I mean, I also have it just it's deep in my family addiction. And so I see, I see the way it plays out. And that's also like part of what kind of opened my eyes to like me trying to like get help and save myself because I started noticing in my older family members, like my aunts and my mom, and I'm like, I'm noticing behaviors of like their drinking didn't used to look like this. And I started to become like kind of, to be honest, just like disappointed in them because I'm just like, what's going on? Like you guys never used to be like this. Like the decisions that were being made and the way that things were being handled with children and stuff. I remember like kind of taking pause and thinking, that's not what I want to be like when I'm their age. And but then also like looking at myself and saying, well, how are you any different? Look at your drinking. Like you're doing the same thing. And kind of that was a really eye-opening moment for me when I started seeing the way that alcohol was showing up in other family members. Like I had already seen the way drugs had destroyed lives. And my dad to this day is still an alcoholic and an addict. And I had seen that, but to have people who I always kind of had on a pedestal of like, oh, they're good. They're not in that alcoholic or addict category, right? But I started to see that showing up because over time you become addicted and the relationship with alcohol changes. Yeah, and I knew for me that I was like this isn't something that I can just moderate or enjoy occasionally. Like I need to remove it. And I knew that for a long time before I was actually able to do it. It definitely was very hard and took a long time, years and years and years to get there.
So is there anything that you have regretted so far about quitting drinking? Is there anything you miss?
Absolutely not. The only thing I would say I regret is that I wish I would have done it sooner. But I also kind of feel like I don't want to be too hard on myself. Like I think everybody has to learn and kind of go through it at their own pace. My drinking it was kind of, I guess, I didn't have like a typical rock bottom, right? So there was nobody around me in my life that was saying like, "Ooh, she's got a problem" or anything like that, because a lot of the people around me were doing the same thing. And so
Right.
if they brought light to like how much I was drinking, that would also have them confronting the way that they were drinking. And so I think that plays a big part in it too. But I mean, even at my work, like nobody knew I was struggling. And it was very much like an internal, like a mental struggle that I was having. And it now looking back at pictures and stuff, I can see like, holy crap, like I mean, it definitely showed up in me physically too. But, nobody said anything to me. I think I just wish that I would have caught it sooner, I guess. But as far as like regretting anything, there's absolutely zero regret that I have. Like, there's been nothing bad that has come from my drinking. Or my quitting drinking, excuse me. It's only been good. And there were so many things that kept me stuck for a long time because I worried about the worst case scenario. Like, what if I
Right.
quit drinking and my mom and I don't speak anymore? What if I quit drinking and it leads to my husband and I getting divorced? What if I quit drinking and nobody likes me and I have no friends? Or what I even worried, like an extreme worry I had was like, what if I quit and I share my story and I get fired? Like, I worried that if people in my profession found out that I had a problem, that I could get fired for it somehow. And now I realize like that that's an irrational thought, but they were very real feelings to me at the time, and they kept me from taking that leap for a long time.
So how did your relationships change, and even your work when they did find out? How did they feel about it?
Yeah, so well, I would say there's like three different kind of relationships I'll touch on. So my relationship with my mom, I had kind of started to distance myself from her a little bit because her drinking was something that was really upsetting to me. And me having kids of my own, I just thought, oh, like, I just don't want them to be around her when she's drinking. And it became like so often that I couldn't even go over and have like a family dinner at her house without her being pretty tipsy. So for that, with my mom, I thought for sure, like, I'm going to tell her that I'm not drinking anymore. I'm going to set some boundaries, and then she's going to be pissed and we're not going to talk anymore. That's kind of how I thought it would go. Um,
Right.
but I just sat her down with a lot of empathy and with a lot of compassion and told her how much I loved her, but told her that I was worried about her. And I said, it's not because I thought that she was going to think like, well, just because you quit drinking doesn't mean everybody has to. But she didn't have that. She didn't have that attitude about it. She very much listened and was bothered that I was disappointed in her. And to my surprise, just like, I think about 6 months after I quit drinking, she also quit drinking. She just said, she didn't realize how much it had affected our relationship. And she kind of knew that it was a problem, but nobody was saying anything to her about it. So for her and I, it's our relationship has gotten so much stronger because we can just like share mocktails now, and like we laugh about, the ways in which we used to just drink way too much together, and we have bonded, and we just appreciate like the presence that we can offer each other now. Not so much of like, let's get together and just get drunk, but like, let's get together and actually spend like quality time together. So for her and I, definitely it's gotten stronger. My husband and I, that was one relationship that I feel like, ooh, that was hard. He is not sober and he doesn't intend to be sober. That's not something he's interested in at this time. And we very much drank together for a long time. Like, our drinking was like we were drinking buddies, and we met that way, drinking together. And so me removing alcohol was a really big shift in our relationship. And to be quite honest, we're really still navigating like what that looks like. I've had to, like, things that I didn't think would bothered me, and I've had to try to set a boundary. Boundaries are sometimes broken, and then we have to kind of come back together and reassess things. But I think ultimately, like, he has cut way back, and he doesn't drink at home anymore, which is huge because we would drink together most nights of the week at home. So he's made some really big steps in trying to support me, and I'm really appreciative for that. And I think just not having alcohol be like that third wheel in our relationship has really allowed us to become closer too. We still have some things to navigate for sure. Like, we still are going to have ongoing conversations about what's okay and what's not okay. But generally speaking, it's only brought us closer. The last one was like my colleagues. I made a big move right before I quit drinking, and I left a job that I was at for 10 years. I had worked with
Wow.
the same people that whole time. And I was moving, I told everybody, and this is true, that I was moving because I wanted to be in the same district as my children so that we could be on the same schedule. But I also just felt like I needed a change.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to share my story, and I knew that I wanted to put it out there. And I was really, really nervous about like what these people are going to think that have worked with me for the past 10 years. So it just kind of worked out that I made that move to a new district and was like, had some distance from all of my old colleagues when I started sharing my story. But it's funny because the people that I was worried the most about, which was like my boss that I had so much love and respect for she was my boss for like 7 out of my 10 years in that district, and her and then some other colleagues, I was just worried that they would be gossipy about it, and they weren't. Like they all reached out and were so supportive and were so proud that I was like sharing. And so many have also reached out sharing like, hey, I've struggled with this too. And I'm like, I'm so like so thankful that you've shared your story. So nothing but positive has come from it.
I love that. I think it's real that like once I started coming out and talking to people about it, it kind of took away, I don't know, took away that bad part of it, right? Like I was always so ashamed and like worried about what people would think. And once I started being vocal about it, it was like people were like, oh, like I get it. I've been there. I have friends that have been there. And I think it's really cool that you were able to, your choice kind of affected what your mom chose to do. I think
Mhm.
that's awesome in the grand scheme of things. And as far as, marriage relationships, I think you're with your husband or your wife 24/7, and you guys, for the most part, make all your decisions together. So when one person makes a decision and another person makes a different one, it can be kind of hard to navigate, but eventually it all comes together, right? And I think that's really cool that it's something you're able to talk about and kind of try to figure out together.
Yeah, it was definitely probably the thing I was the most fearful of, because our drinking was, it was just so connected, and I couldn't understand for the longest time, like, this man that loves me is supposed to be like the person who loves me most in life. I'm telling him that I am struggling. I'm telling him how much this affects me and that I want to quit, but he isn't helping me get there. And I do, I hear so many stories of like, oh, I quit drinking and then my husband quit drinking with me. And I'm like, well, how wonderful. But that is not how it went for me. Like, he fought me for a long time on it and made it really difficult for me. And I ultimately just had to take a step back and realize, okay, like, I'm only in control of me. And I did put like blame on him. And then I realized, like, wait, he's not making me do anything. Like, I can still choose what I want to do. And then if he comes along, great. If not, we're going to have to just figure it out. And that's the way that it's gone.
And I think it just kind of goes to show how much we really are as a society connected to certain things, be it alcohol, medication, cigarettes, whatever. For some of us, it brings us comfort or it brings us like a sense of fellowship. Like that's, where your friends are at and what they're doing, or, it means different things to different people. And even like as much of a problem as I had, it was hard for me to cut it out, right? Even though it was like recognized, it was still a big deal. So I can see how it would be, a harder decision for certain people.
Yeah, you definitely think about, I spent a lot of time, like years, thinking about how much would negatively affect my life if I quit, and like how many relationships it might ruin and these kinds of things, when really, like, I was doing something so brave and so that is so freaking hard to do, and I overcame it, and like nothing but good things has come from that. And I never in a million years thought that like my mom would quit drinking. Never. I mean, never in a million years was that like even a hope that I had. I very much thought that it would go the opposite way and that we would drift apart. But yeah, I just feel like that shows, that's kind of the power in it, and that like you can just share your story, and if that might just ripple and affect one person and make them kind of second guess or make them think more carefully about the decisions that they're making, like, that's so amazing. I think that is another reason that I like to share on social media, even though it was and still is terrifying at times when I post something that's true and real and like how I was feeling or what I was going through when I was drinking. But
Mhm.
just one message that says like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing, or one person in my life that changes themselves for the better, it makes it all worth it. I didn't have anybody in my life that was sober. So it was really hard for me to see like, what does that even look like? And I had this vision in my head that it was just like so dark and gloomy and boring and like just a terrible life to live without alcohol. And so I really just want to show people that are like me that didn't have anybody in their circle of real human beings that was sober, that it isn't all dark and gloomy, and you can find power in it, and you can it's something that you should just be so proud of.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Is there anything that you want to get across to our viewers today? Anything that you want to make sure that you say?
I guess that my message would just be like, keep going. I knew my drinking was problematic for a long time. As soon as I had my daughter, basically, and she's 8 years old, and I've only been sober for a year and 4 months. So, I mean, basically for 7 years, I was questioning my relationship with alcohol and struggling with it. And so I think if I would have just given up and been like, oh, I guess that's just what I am because that's what my family does. And, I'm just a drinker. My life could look a lot different right now. But I kept reading. I kept listening to podcasts. Even if I had like a weekend where I drank a lot and I felt like total crap, I just kept showing up and learning and listening. And eventually over time, it just clicked. And I couldn't be happier to just like and feel more peace to just be on this side of things. And so for anybody who is feeling like they can't do it and that, they are powerless to alcohol, or that they're just kind of accepting what it is and what it's done to their life, like, please keep going, please keep learning, please keep showing up for yourself, because it will click, it will get better, and you will be so proud of yourself when you can see things from the other side. So keep going.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to visit us at Controlled Chaos.
Thank you.